Good afternoon and most welcome to H787. Today we will talk about fractals, subtitle The Order and Cardinality. And once more I am addressing the horizontal line. And it seems, I was looking around this morning, how cardinality and order was perceived amongst modern scholars within different areas like philosophy, literature, theology, psychology also. And it's most interesting that the understanding that the straight line does not exist, that we learn from, amongst other, Benoit Mandelbrot and the other co-constructors of fractal theory, that the straight line is an unreality, it does not exist. What instead we have is fractality, and that also goes for the straight line. That means that a straight line cannot tell in this perceived idea of straightness, homogeneous, that this quality of ordering things, I've written 1, 2, 3, 4, an order that cannot be done if you don't have a straight line. Straight line does not exist. Order is thereby different every time we look at it. This realization needs to go into the liberal arts as well, because if you use a line, you have to sort of accept what we know. And if there are any questions, why can't we use a straight line? It's natural, we always use that. I'd say, no, you have not, it's a new thing. Well, it has a couple of centuries since Descartes and the development of modern science in the 16th century, but it's not natural, it's not coming from the universe, it's an human invention, and it's a sort of misconcept. It is not like you can actually think yourself of a straight line. Everything is fractal and has always been fractal. And this straight line is very, very typical of how we in West perceive most things. This is also how we perceive life. It starts by birth and it ends by death. This is something that is truly Western, does not exist. For an Easterner, every day is a newborn thing. And they also see life as a reincarnation, both in the long span, but also that moment to moment is a reincarnation process, where your intention is the deciding thing, what is going to happen next. Oddly enough, this is also what quantum physics says. And this is, I'd say, the more natural way of looking at things. Whereas the line with a clear-cut start and a clear-cut end, it doesn't really make sense once you take up your magnifying glass and start looking at it very carefully. You will see that typical edged line that is fractality also here. And where you have fractality, you have a dimension that is higher than 1 and lower than 2. It means it's not a straight line. So start with a straight line is me leaving it in itself. I would state it like this. We usually make a very clear-cut division. We say order, that is something special, and cardinality is something very different. Look at our language. Well, I can take Swedish. For this, we use första. That would be in English first, the number 1. And for this, we use the word en or ett. In English, that would be 1 or a. This is, however, not the case in, for instance, Eastern languages. The difference is there, but it's not so clear-cut. It's a bit too clear-cut in Western culture. We think them to be completely different and have nothing to do with each other. And that is also obvious in language. All European language has different system for cardinality and ordinality. This is similar. One could say in an Eastern language, to have some sort of order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or something of the similar, you will also have to have them side by side in the fraction system. Fractals allow for order as well as quantity at the same time. Actually, they need to be there simultaneously, not one without the other. It doesn't really make sense to just have measure quantity. You can actually make a big leap here and go check areas like statistics, things like measuring. We usually differentiate between qualitative measurement, as we call it. Could be some sort of statistical investigation into what people think about ice cream. It's just an example. You can make that qualitative, that you discuss with only a very few people, but you go into depth. And you can do it quantitatively. That means that you ask a lot of people. And the idea with the quantitative is that it erases individual idiosyncrasies, the difference that can be. Certain people could be more different than others. But if you have a huge quantity, the idea is that the mid-range is going to be more normal, so to speak. And that's almost always the idea among students and researchers, that quantitative is more certain. Well, once we start looking at these differences, it does not seem that certain anymore. And it doesn't really make sense to have a huge divide between quantitative and qualitative. It's not, I would say directly already here in the beginning of the lecture, that quantitative would actually make the result more accurate. It could actually be that by making quantitative only and ignoring the quality, the ordinal thing, you actually lose what is pertinent, what is important for the very subject. And this has once again to do with the fractality of the world, and especially the fractality of these things, something that has been hugely ignored. You might have been in contact with these things before. When it comes to what I mentioned earlier, the linear idea of the world, and that is usually the Western vision. Remember Zenon's paradox, that is something that is happening on a line. Lines seem to be a necessity for this thing to start. Whereas we usually say that time and space is more round, curved in Eastern thinking. It actually curved the whole way around and goes back to its start. And this could be put into one day to make it clearer. I think a lifetime is very hard to grasp what that does mean. Look at the three states of consciousness: wake, sleep and dream. And in Western society we see as wakefulness as a succession of moments, a linear succession of moments that starts with the morning, goes all over the day and ends with sleep. And we usually say these different moments we are aware of in a graduated scale. Sometimes we are really aware of the singular moments, and other times when we, for instance, are driving on the motorway that goes completely straight, we forget what is happening. We are becoming unconscious, more or less. When we look at sleep, it's a succession of more or less conscious phases. We have light sleep, we have deep sleep, we have within the sleep short awakenings. Some people remember their dreams and they could even manage to control them. Others do not remember the nights at all. They don't even remember the moments when they woke up. That's quite common. I would say that goes for me. The thing is, can we be conscious while dreaming? Do we dream that we are conscious? Are we conscious that we are dreaming? That we are conscious that perhaps we are dreaming, etc. You all heard that dilemma. And this is, of course, many people's discussion, among them a lot of authors. And they've been investigating both into dream and the waking state. In Eastern society, that linearity doesn't exist, and they don't have this clear-cut division between wakedness, sleep and dream. In a dream, everything happens at the same time. Dream does not usually last more than a very, very short time span. But when we look at it afterwards, we get the impression it was very, very long, because we start to put it into moments, these linear moments that one could say is affected by our specific language, the Western language, that do support in some tendencies linearity. This is how we describe things. Remember once more our clear-cut division in language between ordinals and cardinals. Probably have to order cardinality. You can also call cardinality quantity. You can remember CK, I think that's also a fashion brand, or is it you say? No, CK, CQ, I think, yeah. I think these differences are quite interesting because this is something that's very seldom mentioned outside the area of typology, and it's hugely important. And as I mentioned before, I had a rather big discussion with a professor in typology, and he was surprised that this has not sort of seeped into the other areas, because the assumption done in the other areas is they are completely out of date. And the problems that are constructed, some of them are not real problems. They are caused by an inaccurate model, a not very suitable model coming from technology, which I think is a bit horrific. Why are they imitating technology when it's a technology that's long gone past and makes everything unnecessary cumbersome? That's another reason. Fractality also shows that it's possible to learn how to be conscious during sleep. Consciousness seen as not a line but a fractal chain, or a fractality, which is, I think, is the better term, as I mentioned before, lends itself for much more information uptake. Remember motion. Motion can have a lot more information than any representational system ever. All the computers in the world cannot construct that infinite of fractal bits that this singular movement has. And the more refined I make the movement, the more fractal it becomes. And this is one of the ideas thinking about art, because not all art has the same level of fractality. We mentioned earlier Pollock, how his paintings during a 10 to 20 year interim developed hugely into the area of getting more complex, more interesting, and also more aesthetic. It's a development in aestheticism. And we are usually not aware of this, but this is actually something that also goes on in a text. If you are an author and you write something, the development of the fractality will be increasing if you intuitively disregard the line in your writing, if you don't try to hang the writing into the idea of the line hierarchies, positive, negative, better, worse, all those things, polarity, true for false. These are things of the line. If you leave that to rest, your text will vibrate once more. And that was actually what Derrida was talking about when he said he gave life once more to the text. It was that deadening tendency of the polarities, of the author's misuse of his own writing system. And he healed the text, so it would be accessible both for the author himself, if he was still alive, but also for the reader. It opened up the text. It opens up the text in its depth. And all of a sudden you can realize that each and every author develops if they can be able to leave the polarity. The idea of better and worse, good and wrong, and such things, that sort of smoothens out the fractality of the text. And this smoothing out, it's impossible. What happens is it is not as complex anymore. So it will never turn into a line, but it will lose its complexity. And its complexity is actually its strength. Every piece of nature, whatever reality is, it's getting strengthened by more complexity, and it weakens by less complexity. That is the order of the fractal. One could actually say that the universe itself does have one or two characters that could be counted as fractal. You could say that the universe as such probably is a projection. We mentioned projection before. What is a projection? Yeah, for instance, a geographical map is a two-dimensional projection of the real three-dimensional world, the Earth globe. The film you see on the screen is another type of projection, either in 2-dimension or 3-dimension. We usually perceive the world in few dimensions only, in principle 4. We usually say that there are 3 dimensions of space and count time as a 4th. But this world, as we supposedly perceive it, could very well be in fact nothing but a projection of a universe that has a number of other dimensions. And those dimensions could actually be infinite. And once more, you have fractality lurking about. Or when the projection of something of a larger dimension onto something of a smaller dimension, that will create what we call folds, such as we try to slip a very big dress into a box that is too small for it. And we discussed the folds earlier when we looked at the fern, the ormbunke. And the smaller details in the ormbunke are sort of iterating. So you have an iterating tendency that's almost like repetition. And this iterational principle, it's part of the complexity. And now let me dwell into another subject. Once we're talking about the universe, let's us talk about the universe of Shakespeare. Because here you have a complexity that is usually, because of the line, hugely ignored today. Shakespeare is today cornered into something linear. I make box here, 2-dimensional non-fractal box. What is inside is literature, and it does not affect any other area. It's like you have a representational part of your mind, which is literature, and you have another part which is pleasure, and you have a third part that is your body, something like that. This divisionality that we construct from the idea of the line. That did not used to be the case. We used to have knowledge squares that actually went into each other. Leonardo da Vinci did not separate between technology, mathematics, philosophy, art, not even between oil painting and sculpturing and religion, morality. They all went into the same close fractal universe, projection. Today we separate that. And I think the problem that Alan Bloom pointed to is partly created by the idea that literature today is just literature. It used to be something that incorporated the whole person who was affected by it. It affected that person's morality, it affected, and this is very important, the person's health. Today this is a nonsense subject. How could Shakespeare affect someone's health? Well, we have an almost modern example, and I am not exaggerating when I think that used to be the case with so much more people. But Alexander gained his health from his knowledge of Shakespeare. There's no doubt about that. Body and mind, training his fractal, making them more complex. That goes for intellectual life, but that is also bodily life. No intellectuality without a balance in the body. They go hand in hand. And a lot of people witnessed when Renaissance painting was popular in the different courts, that it was also something that opened their minds and that opened their bodies up. They became more wholesome. Today, to say that is a complete joke. So you hear how the separation has become stronger and stronger in our thinking processes. And one of the reasons the canon has been deserted today is the creation of this idea and a subject where you study all the literature and you also take it apart, you dissect it, you make it something much less, and you say, you look into it. I want to separate everything I read from myself, from my intentions, from what I feel, what I am, and the context I'm reading it. And I want to read that text monosemic. That's well way into the disease of not understanding the world anymore. That's departing from the world, slowly treading into the absurdity of things that don't exist, like a straight line, with a very clear starting point and a very clear stopping point. Someone would say, well, you wrote it on the, you did draw it on the whiteboard, a straight line. It's not straight. You cannot see the fractality anymore. Your eyes are no longer accustomed to perceive them. So when you say straight line, it's not something you see, it's your lack of seeing, that blockage, and you call that a straight line. That's how it works. When there is no perception, you block it out and you say, I see a straight line. A little bit like if you have entering into something horrible, you block your experience out and you call it something. But that doesn't mean that it is out there. This line is as fractal and as anything else in this world. And everything in this world is also folding into itself. That's an important feature of space. And we need to understand that this folding goes on in a literary text as well in the physical world. There is no difference there. Because the idea of the straight line used to be a big case in physics because it was more or less invented there. Now it's no longer, it's fractality, but it continues to be a big thing outside physics. and I'd say it causes great damage. It causes us to think that there is no such a thing as knowledge anymore. We cannot get healthier, we cannot get happier, we can only do a very small narrow thing, and that is sort of dissect the text, taking it apart, analyzing it, trying to take one letter, one word out of something, or some sentence out of a complete context. And as long as the text is not together, as long as the text is parted, fragmented, it loses its value. As long as the text is not read by a person of flesh and blood with an intention, read as it is for that person, his or her intention, then the text comes to life. But to look at the text from afar, that kills off the text. It becomes something no longer vivid, alive. It doesn't have nurturing knowledge. It doesn't soothe your joints. It doesn't go into your bones. It becomes these shallow platitudes you hear among these technological imitating people who believes you can dissect, kill off the text. It only makes sense as a whole. And I read a little bit about Sam Harris today. I found a little booklet yesterday at the local library that I visited. Actually sat there and worked for a while. Wasn't half bad actually, it was quite pleasant. And Sam Harris do the thing, he takes the Bible apart. He takes a couple of quotes there and he tried to analyze them in parts, not looking at the whole picture and not reading those parts as he believed in what he was said. Two grand mistakes: taking something apart, separating it, seeing to this little piece, and not taking the whole into consideration, and the second, not to read it as you believed in it. All philosophers I read, when I open up the book or the article, whatever it is, I go into it, I believe it. That's how you understand something. You try to become it. Afterwards, of course, you can criticize it, but they are all part of knowledge. Some are better, some are worse, but nothing is completely wrong and nothing is completely right. It's more shaded and deepening that goes about. But of course, that doesn't mean you can't say anything. On the contrary, you can become more decisive. You can be clearer in what you say and what you perceive. And this is the good thing by going into fractality, because it opens up your decision taking. You can decide, this is good, this I like, and what you like. And you can describe that. That's the fantastic with this opening. It makes for a much better read. And this is actually the read of the youth. And whereas when I was young, of course, like we all were when we were young, just read probably something that wasn't so advanced in the Blatant, the Five, or whatever they were called. They were fantastic. Now I read something much more advanced. I don't have the same pleasure. The reason is the straight line has affected me, and it takes the meaning out of the book. It needs to be, why not deconstructed, and the meaning open up its doors once more and giving the full pleasure of the book and making my system healthier. Otherwise it doesn't speak to me. It's not anything for me. You understand that phrase? Not anything for me. It's not together with me. It's something distant from me. That's the way Sam Harris read the Bible. He was very far away and he read it as an unbeliever. And that's a very specific reading. And I don't know if it should ever be the case when reading the Bible. Maybe when you read some sort of instruction somewhere, you can read it as you check it out. Is it correctly spelled? But even if you want to understand how the instruction goes, already there, the instruction has to be for you. Otherwise, you won't understand it. For instance, the instruction for this very camera easel I have here. Those instructions I need to get into to understand. Yes, it's a simple construction, but the example still holds. There is something you need to get into. I have to see it as me, Hans, looking into the instructions. So it becomes something for me, not something global or distance for everyone, not the monetary unit. Okay, I think there was quite a bunch of this incredibly interesting thing, and it goes hand in hand what we said before. Well, I say thank you very much for your patience, and I wish you a very pleasant evening. Have a nice time. Bye bye.